The Legend of the Great Siege, Chapter 3. Horse hooves pounded the sandy path, raising dust that trailed behind the speeding riders. They rode together at a steady pace, occasionally slowing down. Adam looked around most of the time. Wojciech rode just behind them. The air was thick with tension. The Ottoman army was advancing into the territories of the Commonwealth. His heart continued to pound in his chest, but the closer they got to the outpost, the more he began to control himself. Jan. Adam's gaze fixed on the trail they were traveling. Something was wrong. There were too many hoofprints embedded in the ground. Worse, they seemed fresh. Jan, he called out louder this time. The experienced scout slowed down, allowing Adam to catch up with him. What is it? Jan asked, but quickly followed Adam's gaze and understood the concern. We better change our route. Let's head into the thicket. It will slow us down, but I'm afraid those tracks don't belong to our scouts, Jan said, steering off the path. Adam nodded and did the same. Wojciech looked questioningly at Jan riding into the forest. Looks like we've stumbled upon a forward patrol of Turkish scouts. We're changing course, Adam warned Wojciech, as he led his horse after Jan. Wojciech looked around nervously for a moment, then followed suit. Branches and uneven terrain definitely slowed the horses. They had to duck under low-hanging branches and navigate around obstacles frequently. They listened intently for any sounds that might indicate the enemy's close presence, but all they heard was the crackling of branches under hooves and the occasional whinny of the horses. The forest will open up soon. We'll bypass the main trail. If we come across a clearing, we'll speed up, Jan said quietly. He knew these lands like few others. The trio approached a spot where the sunlight penetrated the canopy more freely. The clearing greeted them with tall grass and sparse, sprawling trees. Maybe we should go around this place, Wojciech suggested. No way. We'll just waste time. We need to head towards the outpost. If they've set an ambush on the trail, we'll bypass it. Going around the clearing would cost us too much time, Jan replied decisively. You're right, Adam agreed. The warning needs to reach Kamieniec Podolski as quickly as possible. They urged their horses into a trot, trying to conserve their mount's strength. Everything seemed to be going according to plan when they were halfway through the clearing. Suddenly, from their left, a rider appeared. He was an Ottoman scout, dressed in a colorful caftan and turban, with a wide belt holding pistols and a saber. His dark eyes burned with anger, and his face was adorned with a thick black beard. Allahu Akbar, he shouted, raising his weapon high. His voice sounded like the crack of thunder, full of fury and determination, echoing across the clearing. Tracks! Scouts! He yelled, calling out to his comrades. The melodic and threatening Ottoman language filled the air. Adam and his companions realized their plan had been compromised. Son of a dog, Jan spat over his shoulder. Wojciech reached for his musket. No, Adam interrupted him. From this distance you won't hit anything and will just make noise. Wojciech stared blankly at the Ottoman scout for a moment. Let's move before the rest of his comrades arrive. They probably scattered when they noticed we've been off the trail for too long. Follow me, Jan urged, spurring his horse in the direction. The companions followed him. Meanwhile, more scouts began to appear at the forest's edge. 5 Ottomans responded to their comrades' call. Realizing the situation, they all started the chase. Day! They shouted, urging their horses on. They drew their muskets. The sound of gunfire echoed through the forest. One of the Turks fired at the fleeing trio. Soon, other muskets joined in. A bullet whizzed past Adam's ear. He felt as if death had breathed down his neck. By a hair's breadth, he thought, pressing closer to his horse's back. They sped towards a rise that would provide shelter from the fire. Once their horses were out of sight, Jan turned to his companions. Give me your pistols, he shouted. What? Adam heard the older scout's words, but found them so unreasonable that he asked again. There's no time. I have a plan, but I need your weapons. Quickly before they come around the bend. They reached the spot where the road disappeared behind a rock. The scouts handed their weapons to John. "Move out. The outpost is not far." John pointed the direction and led his horse onto the overgrown path. John tucked the pistols into his belt. 3 pistols and 1 musket. 4 shots. That should be enough. He dismounted, took the musket, and slapped the horse's rear. The horse bolted ahead. Adam glanced back at Jan disappearing among the rocks. "Forward," Wojciech shouted, maintaining his composure. As the scouts rounded the bend, Adam and Wojciech managed to slip behind the next curve in the narrow path. John hid behind a rock. He knew this place well. Every boulder brought back memories of his youth. He never thought his life might end here. A fitting end to a beautiful story, he thought. He took up position behind the nearest rock, waiting for the Ottomans to close in. He fired the first shot, changing positions. The Turkish patrol stopped, unsure of the enemy's location and numbers. Jan fired the second shot from another position, sowing confusion once more. When the third bullet was fired, hitting one of the scouts, the enemy began to hesitate. They took cover, searching for shelter. They stared intently at the rocks, trying to determine what the shroom-up they were dealing with. Jan knew he had little time left. He took out his saber and pistol, knowing these were his last weapons. He felt the weight of responsibility for his companions and their mission. He knew he had to buy them enough time to escape. "Scoundrels!" he shouted once more, provoking the Ottomans into action. He ran quickly down the slope, nearly colliding with a large rock. He pressed his back against it. Another shot was fired, the bullet ricocheting and slicing into Jan's calf. He gritted his teeth to avoid crying out in pain. Wounded, surrounded by enemies, with 1 bullet left in his pistol and a saber in his other hand, he had bought precious time for his friends. Soon, a menacing shout in Turkish was heard. The Ottoman scouts were joined by a commander and the rest of the squad. It seemed they were displeased with how things had turned out. The spies had escaped, and they had been deceived by one of them. They approached cautiously towards John. They already knew his position. They didn't want to return with empty hands and a report of nothing but failures. A failed ambush, a failed chase. Their task was to capture him alive and interrogate him. They didn't want to return with nothing. Jan knew this well. He felt his time was running out. He wasn't afraid of death. He had seen enough of it. He had always believed he would die in battle, taking many enemies with him. He was well aware of the tortures awaiting him if he refused to cooperate, and that's exactly what he intended to do. He knew well how the body sizzles under the pressure of red-hot iron. He knew the pain of having fingernails torn out. They probably had a much wider repertoire, which he preferred not to think about right now. Jan looked grimly at the barrel of his pistol. As he prepared the bullet, he felt that it might be his salvation. 1 bullet and 1 solution to this difficult situation. Adam heard the echo of a single shot that broke the prolonged silence. He tightened his grip on the reins until his knuckles turned white. "Jan," Adam thought. The wind brushed a tear from his cheek. They were close to the outpost. They were safe.